Hey, Dave Frary here. This presentation is a video version of a clinic I gave about building a waterfront display. I built this for Seaport Model Works so they could take it to train shows and to display their line of boat kits and built-up models. The display is HO scale and many of the structures are scratch-built. It all started at the Craftsman Structure Show in 2009. The Seaport owner is Bruce Nickerson. He's the man who manufactures these scale model boat kits. He asked me about a display to show off his line of kits. I suggested a New England-themed display that he could bring to shows, and it would be something to get the attendees to stop, spend a few minutes, and study the display. Neither of us knew what the display should look like, so I started with a half-inch scale planning model. This is just a piece of styrofoam cut to size with a curved backdrop. I needed representational buildings, so I took a Dover book of cardboard cutouts, scanned it, and reduced the pages to scale. I cut them out, and then I glued them to a cardboard backing. I assembled about 8 little buildings. They're really just placeholders, so that Bruce could get an idea of what the display would look like when it was completed. I cut a piece of black foam core to represent the land. The lower area is the harbor. The buildings give an approximation of size and the amount of space they'll fill on the display. I scaled the boat hulls and made cardboard cutouts to act as placeholders for the boats. We needed to see what boats would fit best in different areas. While building the model, I was also working out a way to figure out how I'd build the backdrop and then mount it on the frame. Here's the scale model as we moved along. The blue mylar represents the water. The yellow shapes are the boats. The length of the piers were important so that we could fit all the boats in without a lot of crowding. Bruce wanted a lighthouse on the model, so I used a painted dowel to show the base size and the height of the lighthouse. As it turned out, the lighthouse model proved to be a lot taller than the dowel. With the conceptual model approved, it was time to start the actual construction. I built a 1x3 pine frame, and I put on top of this a 1-inch piece of styrofoam. The track is HO, and it's Walther's Code 83. The little display here was point-to-point, and I used an automatic reversing module so the little GE 44-tonner would go from the engine house to the pier and then return. At first, I ran the train track to the car ferry dock. Then I reconsidered after seeing the boat. It was an auto ferry, so I couldn't have the track running onto it, so I moved the train track and ran an auto road to the ferry dock. Next was the water base. It was made from half-inch black gator board. I cut out the foam and set it on top of the gator board. I used a couple of partially built boats to judge how long the wharfs needed to be. While planning, I was moving the structures around to see where they'd look best. I wanted a marine railway on the left-hand side of the display to show off the full-hulled lobster boat model that Seaport made. So I added a crude foam incline to represent the railway. Here's the support I made for the backdrop. It's 1 foot high and it's 3/8 of an inch thick. It's made from wacky wood. Wacky wood is a Luan plywood that's made to bend. This type that I bought bends in the long dimension. You can also buy 4x8 sheets that bend on the short dimension, so you could make columns. I bent the backdrop on a 24-inch radius in both corners. The Luan was glued and screwed in place. Here's the rear of the Luan backdrop support, and I used spackle to fill the screw holes and to cover up some of the wood grain. This will all be sanded smooth and 5 or 6 coats of dark green paint will be applied. The track was relocated to its new position just beside the ferry dock and was mounted on the foam using double-sided carpet tape. In order for the reversing circuit to work correctly, I needed to install a gap and a diode at each end of the display. The diode protects the end of the track by having the engine run into a dead end. When the polarity is reversed, the engine backs out. Now the track is in and it's all wired. A small Bachmann DC train controller was mounted behind the background to the left. My reference library during this project consisted of waterfront photos I'd taken, photos from historical websites, and photos of model waterfronts that impressed me. As soon as the project began, I began building waterfront-looking structures. Some of these were already built and were waiting for me on the shelf. Many needed repainting, and some I added details to. Some were built from kits and others from scratch. Many had lighting added to add impact to the display. This corner of the display was going to be a city or town. I needed the structures to go around the curve of the backdrop and still look natural. I built paper mock-ups to see how they would all look together. Here I painted them different colors for contrast. The mock-up on the right was hit by a malfunctioning spray gun. Paper mock-ups like these are a great way to see how your finished models would look in a given area. And the mock-ups can be used as patterns for building the actual model. Several of the paper models have been replaced by under-construction models. And as I said before, the paper models were used as templates. The brick building in the corner is made from several pieces from design preservation kits. I like to cut these up and rearrange the pieces to make a building that don't look like the originals. The building on the right here is made from cardboard and watercolor paper. I used poster board to build the box, and then added pre-colored strips of 140-pound watercolor paper for the plank siding. The siding was held in place using transfer tape, which is a thin double-sided tape. The shingles are from Wild West models, and the cupola is a cast resin piece that I had. Here's part of the structure that will attach to the paper building that I just spoke about. I'm using Campbell plastic windows and doors and Northeast Lumber's random scribed clapboard stock. Here's the way the two structures look together. I just need to finish the shingling, and I'm using the best laser cut shingles on the roof. That's BEST, all capitals. I've added yet another small building to the right side of the Sheepscott building. For this little structure, I've used laser cut shingle siding along with laser cut 6/6 windows. I've started adding the pre-painted pieces of the seawall. These are resin and plastic castings that I've painted and then glued in place using liquid nails. As we proceed up the street, the next structure is another paper model. It was made using poster board as the box or frame, and then the frame is covered with transfer tape, and then pre-colored strips of watercolor paper are applied over the tape. The two doors are metal castings from a fine-scale miniatures kit. The 6x6 windows are from Atlantic scale models, and the brick foundation is printed paper from Clever Models. Here's the left front of the previous building. This is called the loading area. The windows here are from Campbell Models, and the three cast metal doors are from an old Dyna Models kit. Here the pieces are assembled with a Wild West shingled roof and various metal detail castings glued to it. I like to modify the Wild West shake shingle roofing by cutting off the shakes with scissors to make the shingles more uniform. Here's the completed kit, and this is the first test fit into the scene. I had planned this actual building for this part of the display, so I wanted to see how it would look. The structure sits almost against the backdrop, so I had to place the chimney far enough forward so that it doesn't cast a shadow on the backdrop. This is a test backdrop, and it's printed on cheap paper with location marks printed on it. The real backdrop will be printed on Mylar with a UV screen laminated over it. And here's how the finished structure looked after the surrounding scenery was completed. The corner office of the brick building shown in the inset has an interior. The desk, the safe, chair, filing cabinet, and fireplace are all from SS Limited. The wallpaper and pictures on the walls are from an art catalog, and the light that lights the scene is from a Christmas tree light set. I spent way too much time arranging and then rearranging the background structures. I wanted a smooth transition from the busy corner on the right to the little lobster village on the left. Above are two pictures of the dozens of structure placements I tried before I settled on one I liked. Another paper building was the yellow structure in the center of this picture. I wanted the look of colonial America, and I wanted a lot of windows, shutters, and the clerestory on the roof. Here it is with the scenery in place. It's all made out of watercolor paper over a cardboard frame. The windows are laser cut from laserboard, and the shutters come from an old plastic keybree kit I found in my storage closet. The building to the left of the colonial house is another cardboard model, covered with printed brick paper and a printed roof, all from Clever Models. As I moved to the left-hand side of the display, I did the same arranging and rearranging of the structures on hand. The ship's chandlery in the center with the shingled roof was made for another location, but it looked good here with Arrow Refurbishing connected to it. This is one of the final arrangements. I had to take several photos so I could remember this placement. This was not the actual final placement, as you will see. I built this little engine house for the left side of the display, and after looking at it for several days, I found it to be too big and too overpowering. It just dominated the scene. So I put it on the shelf and built another, smaller engine shed. These are front-on photos of kits that I had built and I had sitting on the shelf. For the backdrop, I needed real-looking structures. So I sent these photos and many more to Hal Reynolds at Atlantic Scale Modelers. He was making me the backdrop in Photoshop, so why not add model structures? Here's the final backdrop, all put together in Photoshop. The trees are from several slides of Maine and of the Canadian forest. The sky is from a slide of Nantucket. Hal placed the photos of the structures into the scenes and grouped them together so they looked good behind the foreground structures. The surface of the display is gator board. It has a lightweight, hard, waterproof surface that really lends itself to being the base for water. I painted the water surface with the following 4 acrylic colors. They are cerulean blue, medium green, white, and black. The sand area was added using my earth-colored indoor flat wall paint. The colors were all applied using a stabbing, dabbing motion. And if you've seen my water DVD, you've seen me doing this technique. Here's a shot of the new engine house along with the waterfront addition. The sand area will be a shallow area where the marine railway will be located. I'm also test fitting the little buildings on the left to see what placement looks best. I don't know if this was a kit or I scratch built it. For this display, I added lighting, details, signage, the awning, and the dead fish on the platform. The fish was rescued from the top of a swizzle stick in a local seafood restaurant. The other trays of gore, the workbench, the sink, and the cow's head were sold with the Dinah Models butcher shop back in the 1960s. Here's the structure in its waterfront setting. The dock is a piece of basswood with a piece of scribed siding glued to it. This waterfront structure started life as a builders and scale waterfront kit. I added the foundation, the cupola, which came from a plastic kit, the stairs, and the AC unit. Located at the far left of the display is this little structure. It's a plastic garage kit set on a block of styrofoam with added details. The stone wall came from a sheet of Holgate & Reynolds embossed stone. I built several of these Sylvan models channel markers. For the seaport display, I added an LED and devised a circuit so that the LED would blink slowly. Here's a golden oldie. It started life as part of a Campbell's kit, and it was on my old HON 30 Elk River Railroad and then on the Thatcher's Inlet Railroad. I added the little blocks of wood for lobster buoys, the painted details, and the pigeons on the roof. Here's a Foss scale models kit with details and a sign added. This building goes all the way back to the original Carrabassett and Dead River. I added the shutters, awnings, and stairs, and put a few details inside that can be seen through the window. I think it's a Keebry kit. I didn't build this one. Bob Hayden did when he was trying out Jack Works methods for using Strathmore board, which is a poster type board, and it dates back to the early 1970s. This is part of a Foss kit. I like this building because it was small and linear, so you could see the structures that are behind it. Here on the left side of the display, I'm setting the buildings into this small village. Each building is on a piece of foam core, which is leveled and then sculptor mold is packed around it. I like having the structures step up the hill because it separates them and shows off each one. Here's the start of the railway. The track is HO, flex track, with most of the ties cut away, and it's sitting on a piece of brick paper. The sides of the railway are castings made out of resin, and they look like stone walls. The railway itself was built from bits and pieces from my scrap box. I found some etched bridge parts which could support the wheels. I built this full-hulled HO lobster boat, and it's from a Seaport resin kit. I added the engine box, propeller, wheel, antenna, and several detailed castings. The decal on the stern came from Sheepscott scale models. Here's a test fit to see how the boat and the cradle would work together. I added sand around the base of the marine railway so that it would blend into the water, and when the water is added, it'll cover the sand. Here's the scene from the top, and it's just waiting for the water. As I said before, the base of the water is a piece of gator board. I primed it with flat black and then painted the water using the 4 acrylic colors I always use, which are black, white, cerulean blue, and medium green. The acrylics are school-grade paints, meaning they're not the top of the line, but they're good enough for model railroad scenery. I left the water surface bare. That means without the gloss coating, until all the structures and the finished scenery was in place. Foam representations of the boats to be displayed helped me determine how much space each would need. They were kind of like placeholders. Here's the lighthouse I built for the display. It's from a kit that's no longer available. It's all wood with plastic doors and windows. The light in the lighthouse has a circuit so that it blinks on and off very slowly. Here's the base for the lighthouse. It was built on top of the water surface. I put down a piece of saran wrap to protect the water. Then I added 1-inch block of styrofoam and then put Scenic Express foam rock pieces around the edges, and it was all held together with sculptor mold. When everything dried, I lifted the base off the water, removed the saran wrap, painted the rocks, and glued the base to the water surface. Here's the lighthouse set in place for a test fit. I painted the rocks with what I call scenery black. It's a warm black that I use as a base for all my rock coloring. Here are the finished rocks that I've painted to represent granite. The scenery black is dry brushed, with a mixture of white, black, raw umber, and raw sienna. It's mostly black and white to make the gray of the rocks. I used a mirror to add scenery to some of the hard-to-see places. I got used to working with the mirror when I built a 12-foot-long canyon that was only accessible from the top. Most of the elements of the display are set in place, and at this point, I went away from the project for about a week. I wanted to look at it fresh when I returned to work on it. The display is almost finished, so I put all the ship models in place for one last look before I added the water. For the water surface, I use Mod Podge, which is a gloss acrylic medium. The first few layers are just dabbed on, but after the water base is down and dried, I add more coats of Mod Podge using a very soft brush. Every evening before bedtime, for about 2 weeks, I'd come to the workshop and add another layer of Mod Podge. Here's how the water looked after it dried. The beauty of Mod Podge is that the more layers you add, the better it looks. Here it's very easy to use Mod Podge because it's brushed around the piers and docks. It's not poured on, so you have absolute control of where the Mod Podge goes. The next order of business was to build the car ferry ramp. It was scratch built from odds and ends, and I had some laser scribed wood planking and used it for the decking. Left over from my model shipbuilding days, I had several pulleys, a few etched brass fittings, rigging thread, and some other details that I used on the ramp. This is one of those models I could never build again, because I could only find 1 or 2 of each of its components. Here's the ferry set in place, and it's waiting for a few HO automobiles. This is the railroad wharf, and the pilings are made from scribed dowels and several commercial resin castings. The seaweed and barnacle is made from scenic foam glued along the bottom edge and painted with gloss paint. The easiest piers to build were these with the stone siding. The pier is a piece of 1-inch styrofoam with plaster wall castings glued to the end and the sides. Tucked away in one of the coves, out of harm's way, is this HO scale Swampscott dory made from a kit sold by Atlantic Scale Models. It was a bugger to build. I needed the optivisor and 3 steady hands. Here it is set in place. I put it in this little cove to protect it from any kind of handling. This building, setting on the pier all by itself, is a modified Bar Mills kit. Here's a close-up of the Bar Mills kit, and you'll notice that about everything in this scene, except the actual building, has been scratch built. Seaport Model Works makes this nice HO waterline lobster boat kit. I built and painted this resin-hulled kit in less than an evening. Seaport sells both half-hull and full-hull HO lobster boat kits. Here's a photo taken of the display at the Springfield, Mass. Model Railroad Show. Bruce and I decided it was time to change the display. So, in 2015, the display was completely reworked, and I added several new foreground and background structures. The railroad now disappears through the rear of the display, and many of the structures have additional lighting. The foreground will have 3 new buildings built especially for this display. 2 of them, Captain Hook and Gilly's Small Boat Repair, will be offered as kits.